If you have been in the tech scene for a while, you probably have seen this list. It's a list of failure reasons by CB Insights. It's a very popular list. I often see it at the kickoff of accelerator programs to warn founders about the no market need trap. Um, However, despite the popularity, it's not a very rigorous list. It's not based on academic research, meeting scientific criteria, and to be frank, it shows. The majority of the categories of this list by CB Insight are self-reported by founders, and maybe they categorize them, but therefore the categories are a little bit ambitious, if you ask me. For example, how is no market me different from poor product, and how is ran out of cash? On top, is startup failure not by definition running out of cash? That's a tautology. It's like answering the question, why did the ship sink? Because it didn't float anymore. Sure, but that is not that's circular reasoning. And that's just one of the things that I don't like about this list, even though that I do feel no market need is a reason a lot of startups fail, and 40% even seems low in my book. Um, Among all these vague failure reasons, one stood out to me, and they call it the mistiming of product. I've heard founders talk about the timing on podcasts when they list the reason they failed, and I always feel a little bit uneasy. What do you mean timing? In this article, I will do a deep dive into the mythical failure reason called timing. So to begin with, I see timing everywhere. On podcast, on blog, it's a dominant explanation of why startups fail. And I did a little survey among my followers on LinkedIn and asked them like, hey, why did your first startup fail? And I put product mistiming in there, and 16% still picked it. So apparently, it's a prevalent idea among our community. But what does timing mean? So if we go into what CB Insights intends with timing, they don't mean seasonal timing, like trying to sell snowboards in May. CB Insights defines timing to release your product at the wrong time. If you release your product too early, users may write it off as not good enough, and getting them back may be difficult if their first impression of you was negative. And if you release your product too late, you may have missed your window of opportunity in the market. And there was an employee of Coxida, and they said we moved faster than our customers could move. We moved with tech that wasn't ready for them. Um, Summarized, we were too early. So here you can already see these sloppy definitions, like users may write off as not good enough. Does that mean the product was not good enough? Because that's just another distinct failure reason called poor product. But perhaps that second part is clearer. We were too early, and that's something I found in other quotes collected by CB Insights. A drone company said, we were the pioneers in this market. Unfortunately, the market took longer to mature than we expected. Another one from a cancer diagnostics company. We may have been right that specific types of cancer is hot, but we didn't have enough capital around to fund the story until the market caught up. So to me, it seems that these founders claimed that they knew it all and had the right idea and the right product ready. It's just that they were too visionary to get traction. The world wasn't ready for them. To them, timing is a strategic issue and nothing else. If only they had launched their product like 5 to 10 years later, they would have been successful. And this is where I smell bullshit. I'm not strawmanning here, at least I hope, but I think timing is an umbrella excuse. Timing can be a way to externalize your failure away from yourself so your ego doesn't take a hit. To paint an extreme caricature, we didn't make any mistakes. It was the market that's not ready. However, However, it could be that sometimes timing is the answer. And to combat my pessimism, I will explore whether timing is indeed a valid explanation for innovation failure. So, to refute my cynical theory, I just need to find one case where it's clear that indeed timing is the best explanation for startup failure. If I succeed in my falsification inquiry, I can drop my grudge. However, to investigate this, I can't use recent examples of CB Insights. If you say the market wasn't ready in 23 or 2024, likely it isn't ready in 2026. So therefore, I'm going through my mental Rolodex of innovations that struggled with adoption much longer ago, with one case stemming from the early 1900s. Because then we have the power of hindsight to reflect, like what did go down really. And through these cases, I will build up a definition of what timing means to me. And in the end, after digging through, I found one example that might fit the category of timing. You be the judge. Let's go. So the first suspect is General Magic. It's the startup that made one of the first smartphones. And the team had some serious talent. To name a few, You got Pierre Omidyar, who later founded eBay, Tony Fadell, who worked on the iPod and iPhone later and founded Nest, and Andy Rubin, who later founded and created Android, which was acquired by Google, obviously. Kevin Lynch, who later became the CTO of Adobe. So, team packed with talent. Then, they launched in 1994 the equivalent of a modern day smartphone. They made software and had initial deals with Sony and Motorola. The device had apps, internet, could make phone calls, and even had emojis. The bad chances are you've never heard about General Magic. Why? Well, because it flopped hard. um, why did it fail? I went through a bunch of sources, but I will list just a few. So first, the thing was quite slow. The battery was very bad. For the internet on the Sony Magic Link device, you needed to plug in a cable. Yes, very mobile indeed. The Motorola variant had a wireless modem with a data rate of 4800 bps, which translates to 0.6 kilobyte per second. An MP3 song would take approximately 2 hours to download. The MP3 codec was released in 1994, so I guess not a lot of MP3 songs have been downloaded on those devices. The internet that you could use was not the internet, but some AT&T private network like BlackBerry did with their ping messaging. The initial versions didn't ship with a web browser, the screen stuck in most lighting conditions because it had no backlight, and the touchscreen was not very responsible. Furthermore, yes, it's more, it was much more expensive than most smartphones today. The retail price was $800 in 1994, which is equivalent to almost $2,000 today. In 2026, only a fully maxed out iPhone Pro Max with 2 terabytes of storage hits that spot in a very, very mature market. Breaking the bank for a device that doesn't work well, not surprisingly, it flopped. But did General Magic fail because of timing? Well, if you ask Tony Fadell, one of the founding members, he would say yes. He wrote a book on this and talks about his experience. He mentioned that the timing was wrong, and he often states that the timing should be right for successful startups. Also, he reflects that having a vision is different from shipping a product. Sure, but do they relate to timing? Indeed, they had a vision that vaguely resembles a modern smartphone. We cannot disagree about that, likely. But also, you have to see that they have chosen a lot of technologies to work with that weren't mature enough yet. And is picking immature technologies really a timing issue? You could argue it's a design failure. The designers and engineers imagined a device that the technology of that era simply wouldn't support. So let's take the touchscreen. It notoriously all touchscreens sucked back then. Apple Newton's early iPad flopped partially because this touchscreen notoriously sucked so badly that it was impossible to use. So relying on that immature technology is a mistake, and that's perhaps the reason that BlackBerry took off for a brief time as a smartphone, because buttons were a much more reliable user interface. And that's just one of the many technological shortcomings of General Magic. So what is the actual failure reason then? Betting on immature technologies. So when people say timing is the issue, sometimes it's just masking for another failure reason, which is building on immature technologies, which is a much more nuanced take. I argue if this is the case, don't label it timing, because it doesn't represent the situation well, and you want other people to learn from it. However, there is an anachronistic aspect to it. We can only say in hindsight for some technologies that it was perhaps immature. Let's unpack another example to really explain myself clearly. And for that, we're going to hydrogen cars. So around the year 2000, hydrogen as a fuel for mobility experienced a lot of hype. As more people realized there is limited resources for fossil fuels, hydrogen became the savior. Hydrogen packs 3 times the energy of petrol and over 100 times the energy of an EV car battery. So that sounds pretty promising, right? Well, at some point, one car manufacturer announced a project to make a hydrogen fuel cell car for the masses, ready in a couple of years. And what happened next was a bubble. Car manufacturer after car manufacturer made a similar promise, each, each betting on each other. And in 2003, amidst a post 9/11 Iraq invasion, cynically, the Bush administration invested over $1 billion with the famous slogan, "The first car driven by a child born today could be powered by hydrogen." Well, perhaps this investment was at the political peak of inflated expectations of the technology. And between all these optimistic statements, researchers found increasingly pessimistic claims emerging. You can see, for instance, how Ford went from full launch in 8 years to commercial to commercial in 18 years, and to, if ever, 2 years later. It's such a bubble, and now this is how they implode. But why did they adjust their prognosis? Simple. The technology was not ready yet. Common critiques: expensive, lack of infrastructure, and storage issues. So fast forward to today, despite the potential of the fuel, it's still not ready in 2026. Hydrogen projects are being cancelled across industries. For example, Airbus cancelled its hydrogen plane as the aviation industry doesn't believe in it. EVs have made a bigger impact on petrol car sales than hydrogen. We can all conclude that. But did hydrogen fail because of timing? Well, were all those projects timed wrong? I wouldn't say that. I think it's not the most accurate way of explaining what's going on. You can find ideas and prototypes for hydrogen cars dating back to 1806. That's 2 centuries ago. That means that it has taken over 2 centuries, and we haven't figured it out. So such a trajectory sounds more like a technological challenge rather than a strategic timing issue. You can't say timing is the issue because the technology hasn't arrived yet. That's like saying people trying to build teleport or time travel machines failed due to timing. No, the actual failure reasoning is different. Hydrogen failed because it hit a technological ceiling. It's just not feasible today or extremely unviable. Sure, there are some pilot projects, but you don't see the mass adoption that was once anticipated. Still, timing is sometimes used as an argument for deep tech startups that hit these technological ceilings. For example, the innovative material graphene was expected to revolutionize storage and batteries. Despite the Nobel Prize awarded for the discovery involving the manufacturing of graphene, it hasn't lived up to the expectations. So far, it seems that timing is just a lazy way of explaining the lack of technological success. But what happens if we just set the technology aside for a moment? Let's move to the third suspect. Google Glass. So let's assume people figure out the technology. Yeah, it mostly works. Then surely we can find a product that's too visionary for the people. There's a saying that goes most advanced yet acceptable. Remember Google Glass when it was launched in 2012 and killed in 2015? Was Google Glass too early? This is me, by the way, in 2030. A designer friend who interned at Google, and I remember being quite jealous at him, took it to the design school I was doing my master's in. And I remember putting it on, posting on Facebook, and you can actually see that the comment got more likes than the picture itself. The product itself didn't really left a rich impression on me, but I remember it kind of worked. But others have listed it was a prototype after all, as buggy, slow, overheating issues, clunky voice, and gesture UI, and bad battery life. However, Google Glass had an interesting aspect to its failure that's not technological. Today, body cams and wearables with cameras are more common, like Ray-Ban's Meta glasses. But back then in society, people didn't like the idea of being recorded all the time. Even the term glass hole was coined by Wired for people who wore it anyways, despite the social backlash. This illustrates the social aspect of innovation. So was Google Glass mistimed? Well, beyond the tech failure, this is an example where there's some societal backlash to new products. Did that stop adoption? I would not say so. Innovators often ignore this social backlash. For instance, mobile phones were not deemed necessary by the masses at the start. There's this video, and be sure it shows the response of people in 1998 explaining why they don't need a smartphone. They say, "Oh, I'm not that important," or "It sounds annoying being called when cycling." Yeah, it's indeed a very Dutch video. So in books, social acceptance is often listed as a factor hindering innovation adoption, but that's also because you can always find naysayers to any new technology. So what's really blocking there? I doubt that this was blocking in the case of Google Glass. The product just sucked with a 2-hour battery life. Do you remember the Rabbit Pin? It faced similar backlash, but it didn't kill the product. The fact that it barely worked and it was just expensive hardware running Android with simple voice-based LLM that didn't work well killed it. So if we look at the actual failure reason, Google lacked some core killer features that make it highly desirable. Meta glasses indeed are a thing right now, but I barely see them in the wild. Adoption seems niche, and I assume it's mostly being used by TikTokers to record easily in public, which is a killer feature for them. Google Glass just didn't create enough value. Okay, so far, the timing failure seems to come down to two things. The technology didn't work or barely worked and didn't provide enough value, or the technology was way too expensive for the little value it provided. Okay, this is still quite technological, but what if we find this technology that was ready and only a social aspect was blocking? For that, you need to hop on my time machine to 9001, a machine I built for the sake of this article. Elevators is a technology we take for granted. It's a technology that we don't really even see much more as an innovation anymore. The vertical people movers originated in the 19th century, and back then, controlling a lift carriage was a skill, almost like operating a tram. The lift boys needed to stop the elevator exactly at the right level by operating a lever. And some of these lift boys could smoothly stop the lift carriage perfectly aligned with the floor it was heading to. Lift boys would sometimes, if the riders were rude or didn't expect a tip, on purpose leave a gap to annoy the passengers. And in my research, I even found a German lift boy who was so elegant in his skill, he even successfully seduced a woman with it. And he worked in a hotel anyway, so the next steps were pretty close by. So the lift boy itself was also quite technically apt. It could do simple repairs without the need of a mechanic to come. It was quite a different profession as we see it today in most luxury hotels. Why did they disappear? In the first decade of the previous century, elevator buttons were invented. Elevator buttons entered the market in the early 1900s, and indeed some of the new elevators are equipped with the buttons, but not all. Far not all. Actually, even though it's economic, the elevator buttons don't really take off as expected. It took half a century. Only in 1950s it started to be really dominant. What happened there? When the elevator was introduced, people were scared they would drop all of a sudden. Even though there were mechanisms preventing that, and they would prevent a sudden plummet to death, the general public really wanted somebody professional in the cabin. It made them feel safe. Even the few elevators with buttons still had a lift boy, often. It was not only for safety. The lift boy also was a host. He would do some enforced small talk, like somebody working behind the bar, and that surely fixes the awkward floor staring we often do today. So why did lift boys stay for so long? It was a little bit like, this is how we do it. So why did it shift? Well, most historians point to a strike in New York in 1945 of over 15,000 lift boys and other lift related workers. The economic damages were over $100 million. That triggered a lot of building owners to now equip all the elevators with buttons because they just preferred reliability over luxury. And that was the start of the demise of the lift boy. And in the next decades, the carriage operators would make place for push buttons that the peasants control. We now only see lift boys in luxurious hotels or countries where wages are low enough to pay for it. And it's important to note that in 1950, Otis Elevator Company launched the Autotronic, which is a coordination system which allows the coordination of multiple elevators of the same building efficiently. And this contributed surely to the adoption. So it's never one thing that's holding it back, but the social backlash has never been so clear for an innovation, requiring a strike to push people over the ledge. So the actual failure reason here, I would argue that the dominant failure reason here for the early push button for a long time was cultural resistance. The technology worked, but they were just too early to the market. We can actually say that. So by those lines, we might say they mistimed their product. But that brings me to another issue, the one I unpack last. When you say we mistimed our product, you are also saying that you have considered postponing it. Based on my experience with working with over 350 startups, I've never heard that line of reasoning. Maybe we should stop our startup and try it in 5 to 10 years. I've never heard that. Founders don't say that, or at least not very often. Sometimes founders shelve their ideas to pick it up later, but that's just a way to deal with the breakup. I've never seen founders pick it up again after 5 years. You might hear people, they say how they underestimated how long a market took to mature, or for supporting infrastructure to arise, or for technologies to develop. Sure. But those are hindsight explanations that don't have too much to do with strategic intentions. When you say timing, it's a verb, like segmenting your market. And there you could say we missegmented our market and therefore we failed. But I've never seen a founder who wants to postpone the attempt to introduce his product. Next, most founders don't have an array of products to choose from. So startups mostly work and trying to get this one thing to work. Timing doesn't really seem like a strategic consideration of like, when should we launch? Are we trying to postpone it? Nah, never heard it. So summarizing, based on my deep dive, I would argue that timing is often an inaccurate explanation of startup failure. It's an umbrella term that shields the founder's ego, but doesn't really show what happened in reality. Often, there are more accurate explanations for startup failure, like building on immature tech, hitting technological ceilings, getting social backlash, or meeting cultural resistance. Calling it timing suggests there's something temporal that you can control as a founder, where most founders just focus on getting that one idea to market. If you encounter timing as a failure reason from now on, you should just ask questions and dig deeper if you really want to learn something. My verdict now: failure reason of mistiming product indeed is a myth. Stop telling yourself you're failing because of timing. Thanks for watching.